I just have these, anywhere from 5 to 9 categories that I know I can post to at any time. And some of those things are set. So I know every single week I'm posting 6 times in my feed.
Hey there, it's Ruthie from RuthieGray.mom, and welcome to Instagram Insider Hacks. So easy, your mom can do it. This is the podcast that teaches you how to authentically deliver your message in a non-pushy way. If you want to receive engagement and investment on your Insta time, listen in. And now, here's your host, me, Ruthie Gray. Welcome back to the Instagram Insider Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Amber Cullum from the Grace Enough podcast. Welcome, Amber. It's good to see you and have you over on the podcast.
Thanks, Ruthie. It's nice to connect with you and your audience.
I feel like we made an instant connection right through the Christian Podcasters Association way back there last year. And you sort of reached out to me and took me under your wing because I was very wet behind the ears and had just launched the podcast. And you gave me some helpful information and we just started dialoguing and it just grew from there. So,
yeah, it's really nice when you have something like Christian Podcasters Association and then you do Instagram stuff. And so you can kind of switch over onto Instagram and have these dialogues back and forth that have to do with Instagram and podcasting. So it made it pretty easy.
Yeah, it did. It was just kind of seamless and we just hit it off. You know, you just have some of those people that you hit it off with.
I think it's the mountain girl in us. Because, I'm a Kentucky girl. So we have that in common. West Virginia, Kentucky.
Did I know that?
I don't know. I don't live in Kentucky now, but I grew up in Eastern Kentucky in the mountains, Appalachia. I know all about it.
Okay. This is it then. This is it. Yeah. We know about the hollers and all that.
And the coal mining.
Yes. So if you're listening to this and you have no idea where I live, I split time. I'm from originally West Virginia and I am in West Virginia right now, but my husband and I split time between West Virginia and St. Pete, Florida. So this is our connection then. We just figured it out.
That's right. Well, and remember, I can just chat forever. Then my husband's whole side of the family is Largo, Florida, which is basically St. Pete.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're like,
that's right.
We have a lot of these connections because you post pictures and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's Tampa. I lived there for 8 years. I'm always telling you all these things about where you probably already know them.
Yeah, that's right. We have a connection in both states. So awesome. I love that. Well, Amber, tell us a little bit about the Grace Enough podcast before we get started and kind of what your message is.
Yeah, Grace Enough is a podcast that's really designed to encourage the believer that God can use you to impact his kingdom no matter what your story is. We know that it requires this surrender and this trust of Jesus, but at the end of the day, he can take the most broken person and use that to bring other people unto himself. And so that's really a lot of what the podcast is about, from sharing people's stories to also having people on that encourages us to actually use our story to do those things.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, I think this is such an important message. I love it. I love even the name Grace Enough, because somehow along our Christian journey and walk, we sometimes make it into something else that is something we have to do, or if we don't do, like if I don't read the Bible through in a year, it's not good enough, and things like that.
Right.
But even more so, no matter what we do, we are forgiven for our sins, past, present, and future.
Yeah.
That's a hard concept, but there's grace enough for that, right?
That is right. I mean, and it's one of those things where as we learn to adore Christ more and more, and sometimes that happens through the transformative power in people's lives, those things overflow out of that desire to be in God's word, because that's how you can know him more. And so it's not so much about achieving as much as it is about just growing in a love for Jesus that then, kind of propels you forward to do those things.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
We get the cart before the horse sometimes.
Yes, we do.
We get the whatever.
Well, we want to achieve. Wagon. We're achievers. It's just very much in our blood. Do, yes. earn. And that's the exact opposite of God.
That's exactly right. God's not like anything we know or could even imagine, which is right. Fantastic, right?
Praise the Lord.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, Amber has been in my membership community for Instagram for the last 3 months. And we've just so enjoyed having her there and just building that community. And she's learned a lot. And she's killing it on Instagram, especially the Reels. And she's going to give us a few tips about what she does with Reels in a minute. But Amber, I'd like for you to share with our audience, what are like the 3 main things that are helping you see results on Instagram and drive traffic?
Yeah. So the biggest things right now for me, I mean, Canva is a tool that I use. I do have the professional version because I used the free version for some time and just needed to go ahead and pay for the full version. But the free version has plenty of things you can use. And so I have these 3 templates that, I finally nailed down that has my, my brand scheme and all of that. And I love to have those 3, loaded and ready to go, with just able to easily change the content. Having that has made a huge difference for me because people recognize it as belonging to Grace Enough podcast, but also it just makes the process easier, right? And we all need that. But I also just want people to know that stuff doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I am 2 years in now and just kind of figured that out in the last really 3 months of being with you and watching some other people in the community. And then another thing is having categories. Like I just have these, anywhere from 5 to 9 categories that I know I can post to at any time. And some of those things are set. So I know every single week I'm posting 6 times in my feed. I know one of those is going to be my podcast episode. One day is going to be quotes from my podcast. And then the other 4 are kind of ever changing, but ultimately they are the same. So it's, either has to do with parenting or a resource I would recommend or my why or a behind the scenes. And so I'm always kind of functioning out of those things. So I'm not just trying to pull something from thin air. And then lastly is I've tried to engage more in stories, and I'm not great about just popping on and saying stuff, but I do that occasionally. But 2 things that I always share, and that is on Tuesday when my podcast goes live, I always share the graphic in my stories. And then I share a tidbit of the recorded portion of my podcast so people can hear it, with the nice little sticker that says sound on. And then the next slide will be, how can you go and listen to this? And then the other one that gets great engagement is would you rather? I post like 5 or 6 would you rather questions every week. And it's fun for me and it's fun for my audience. And so those are 2 things that every week are going to for sure be in my stories. And then I just kind of fill in the gaps along the way.
Yeah. And so I want to go back to what you said about you share from your podcast a little bit of the sound.
Yeah.
What kind of software do you use for that?
Yeah. So believe it or not, I used to use Headliner, which is a great software to use, and I still will use it sometimes. And it comes in little 15-second sound bites. But now I have an iPhone. And if you have an iPhone, you can actually pull down the screen and just record directly from your phone. And so I will be playing the podcast through my phone and just record it. And then I upload that video directly onto my stories. And for me, that is taken out an app. So that's one less step. And then it's easy because I already know in my podcast what like little soundbite I want to have. And so I don't know how to describe that like on audio, but if you have an iPhone and you just pull it down, the home screen, there's a little tiny dot in the left-hand corner. If you touch that, you can record anything that's on your screen.
I love this tip you just gave me because I use Headliner, but I use the recording on my phone all the time, the screen record, to post tips in my stories for my people, but I've never thought of doing it that way.
Yes, you're the third person who has said that to me in 2 weeks. How do you do that? I'm like, I just use that screen recorder. And they're like, oh my gosh. I'm like, it's so much easier than using an app to search your podcast for the audio clip you want.
Yes.
It is.
Complete revelation, you guys. A life changer. Okay, that right there was worth the whole podcast episode.
Yay!
Right there.
See, I can teach you too, Ruthie.
Yes, you can. Well, I've been learning from you, girl, since day one about podcasting. So, all right. So the three things that you mainly do is you have the categories, which helps free up headspace for everything else.
Yes.
And then you use templates, and then you have a story strategy. So you know you're going to do 2 certain types of stories every week. One is the podcast, and one is the Would You Rather, which you're having fun, but you're creating engagement, which is great because then you're talking to people. You have an opportunity to talk to them about, do they like snakes or frogs or whatever, just fun stuff.
That's right.
And you're building relationships, which is super important. And I want to talk about something else, though, that you do that is so fun. And I think it makes you really approachable. And that is reels. You do those really well. So talk to us about, how do you figure out what to do?
Well, Ruthie, that's a good question because this is what happened. Reels hit Instagram and immediately it was like, okay, I know these get more weight in the algorithm. And I don't know a lot about the algorithm. I'm going to be honest, I don't fully understand it. But I knew the very first reel I posted got a lot more views than any of my other content. And that was simply me. I had a video going behind me of my son crossing the monkey bars. And I was basically just acting like a silly mom, like dodging him and things like that. And it got a lot of views. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. And then you started hearing more and more, and you started seeing him more and more. And I started trying to think, okay, if this is going to be seen by more people, how can I apply it to the podcast, to my why, to my audience? And so I started looking at other podcasters, other content creators, Pat Flynn being one of those, who decided for like 30 days he was going to do, it might have been longer, he was going to do nothing but post a reel. That was it, to see if it actually worked. And he's just a genius at content creation.
I love that. I love that idea.
I mean, and he actually encourages you to steal his ideas. He's like, use them. I want you to use them to see if they work for you. And so a couple of them I did, but also what I saw was, okay, he's a content creator and he's taking what he does and applying it to a reel. How can I do that with podcasting? So I started thinking through, why do I podcast? What do I want listeners to get out of my podcast? What is important to me? What is the behind the scenes like? And then I just started putting videos together that were real life, maybe from my mission statement, or, the one I had told you about that has gotten the most views is the behind the scenes where I'm sitting with my kids downstairs, helping them with homeschool. And I look at my watch and I look at the screen and I'm like, that panic mom feeling of, I'm running behind. And then you see me run up the stairs and get ready and come into this, my studio, which is our guest bedroom. And it got a ton of views because everybody can relate to that.
Yes.
And man, if you hashtag that with mom struggles, mom life, work at home mom life, real life, it just blows up because everybody understands that it's hard. And they think it's funny because they're like, oh, I'm not alone.
That's it.
So that's kind of, how I've done it.
I love that. So you've given us 2 important tips there. Number 1, behind the scenes tips work really well. Number 2, some great hashtags that are juicy are homeschool mom, homeschool life, work at home mom.
Yep.
And
mom struggles.
Yeah, the mom life. And then the other thing though about reels is you can plan them out and it's great to base them on your categories, but it's also fun to do real life, like the very first one you did.
Yes.
That was real life and it was in the moment. And sometimes some of my best reels are done in the moment.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, like on Reels, if people will look, I can't remember exactly where it's at on the side of the screen, but it's basically where the filters are. There is a green screen. And the green screen is what allows you to upload previous video that you have taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I did one where I had actually just videoed my son for fun because he was acting like he was going, fighting me with a pillow and stuff like that. And it didn't have anything to do with reels. But later I was like, this is awesome. And I posted Eye of the Tiger with it. And I was like dodging his pillows and all of that. And it turned out great. And it was not planned at all. It was basically like this video just looks like he's hitting me in the back of the head. And people thought it didn't have anything to do with podcasting, but it was my life.
Yes.
It was not made up. It's like, this really is my life. I spend most of my day wrestling or trying to get away for some alone time for my kids. That's what I do. So it's real life.
I love it. I love it. And that's often the missing component in a lot of people's Instagrams is they just need to share some real life so that people can develop that know, like, and trust factor with them.
Yes.
And then they start paying attention to your message.
And you helped me with that a lot.
Okay, we're not done with this conversation yet, and it pivots into discussing Instagram analytics. So if you want to learn how to decipher Instagram analytics, come back next week for that. But first, let's review the key takeaways from this episode on the 3 key actions and tools for generating Instagram traffic. The first takeaway is Amber uses categories, and she is 100% correct in doing this to free up mind space. She uses 5 to 9 categories, I believe she said, and she has Canva templates. Canva is a fantastic software to use for your Instagram. Secondly, she has pre-planned subjects in her stories every week. She knows she's going to do 2 separate things. Thirdly, she uses her iPhone recorder for her podcast so that she can grab sound bites and add over at Instagram. She gave some really good tips on how to do reels, behind the scenes, juicy hashtags for mom work life, and she does and shares real life. So next week, Amber and I delve into decoding Instagram analytics to reach your target audience. And in this episode, I'm teaching her a few tips of the trade. You'll discover how to test analytics to determine best times to post, generate leads, and develop super fans. I hope you'll join us. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, could I ask you a huge favor? Would you take a moment to tap the 5 stars? And if you're receiving value here, if it's helping you with your Instagram, would you take a second to leave a review? I always offer my audience virtual chocolate, and you'll be no exception, or virtual tacos, whichever you like best. And don't forget to join me next week for how to crack the code on Instagram analytics and reach your target audience.